It's a milestone night for Tavares and Marner as the Maple Leafs bounce back with a big win over Detroit. Welcome into Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at Bodog.net. Rob Wong, joined alongside, as always, by David Alter, who comes to us from Scotiabank Arena. Maple Leafs picking up a 4-1 win over the Detroit Red Wings as they get a nice performance from Ilya Samsonov. They get a nice performance from John Tavares and Mitch Marner as well. But if you watch the first 20 minutes of this game, Dave, I don't think anybody would have expected this to happen because it was a pretty sleepy beginning for the Maple Leafs. They only had 2 shots on goal in that first period and really struggled to generate too much offensively. It felt like they were skating in mud a little bit. You got to give credit to Detroit, of course, who was doing a very good job of muddying things up for the Maple Leafs. But clearly something happened at the intermission. Sheldon Keefe with the big pep talk got the guys going, and they were able to sort things out.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. When you look at the even strength minutes in that first period, and then you compare it to other penalty-filled periods that the Leafs have and how they perform, that seems to be their kryptonite. If you throw them out of a even strength rhythm early, or they take some penalties, it takes a long time for them to recover. There was only 12 minutes and 41 seconds of even strength play in that opening period. And I remember looking at that being like, wow, that is kind of low. No wonder that at that 5-on-5, the Red Wings had 78% of the expected goals in that. Like, shots are what they are. We always look at some other things, but that was pretty significant to see that against the Leafs. And you already started to think, okay, well, that looks like a continuation of what took place in the final 2 minutes of the previous game. That what's it going to take to kind of figure themselves out of this slide? And so the second period, they right the ship. They're a little bit more disciplined. They start that period with a bit of a abbreviated power play, and that kind of helped get things going back to the traditional one there because of a situational thing. But yeah, it's interesting, like, to see the Leafs have this, be better. It seems when the game is cleaner, they do a better job. If it gets physical and aggressive and they get shaken off their game and emotions kind of get mixed into it, that's where things start to kind of go off the rails a little bit. And lucky for the Leafs, that was only in that first period, and they had enough time to recover from that, unlike the other night against the Kraken.
Yeah, and it's interesting when it comes to the first period. You know, historically, it felt like the last maybe 3 or 4 seasons, a lot of the conversation, maybe even further beyond that, has been about, starts, right? We always, I think, talked about, the Maple Leafs would always have some sluggish starts here or there, and it would take them a while to get going. I don't really think that's been the case this year. I mean, they are one of the better teams in the second period. That's pretty obvious, and we saw that once again come to the forefront. But I wouldn't say, slow starts have been too much of a hallmark of this year's team.
No, it hasn't been. They've been all right in the first period. Their second period has been stellar with the exception of the previous 2 games to this one. In 2023, for some reason, against the Blues and against the Kraken, the second period has been an unmitigated disaster. Well, they kind of fixed that tonight. And then the third period in the previous part of the season is usually when things kind of balanced out, but either they had a big enough lead or they were able to kind of pump the brakes defensively and hang on and bend but not break, that they're able to kind of be okay in that. So the first period, kind of a tilted affair, but it helps. We talked about on the last podcast about how when a goaltender doesn't see a lot of shots in the opening frame, sometimes it's hard to kind of get engaged when all of a sudden there's a big flurry, even though they're professionals and they're paid to do this, and the best goalies do it better than anybody else. It is a tough thing when you see no rubber for an extended period of time, and then the chances coming back at you are very high danger and odd man rushes and breaks on turnovers. And so that's a very difficult thing. So at least if there was any saving grace for the Leafs in this game in that opening period, is it allowed Samsonov to see some rubber. Yeah, maybe that lone goal he gave up, he probably would have liked to have back, but afterwards he made some pretty big saves that were needed to kind of help change the tide of the game.
Yeah, that definitely was not the case on the other end, I guess, for Magnus Hellberg, who got the start for the Red Wings, who, only saw those 2 shots on goal in the first, but made some ridiculous saves to keep this one really from getting out of hand for the Detroit Red Wings. But we'll talk about the goaltending on the Maple Leaf side coming up. But as I mentioned, a couple of milestones for the Maple Leafs in this one, beginning with Mitch Marner, who scored that power play goal in the second period to get the Maple Leafs on the board just about 20 seconds into the frame. And that, of course, is his 500th career point, doing it in 467 games, which is 22 more than Austin Matthews, who reached that mark just a few games ago. Marner says it is definitely something to be proud of.
I don't know. I mean, it's just a cool moment for sure. You definitely don't try and really think about setting milestones or doing milestones and trying to not be selfish about yourself, but it's definitely a cool one, especially since, like I've been saying to you guys, growing up here in the city and dreaming to play for this team and doing it all with this team. It's been special. It's been a lot of fun, but there's bigger goals ahead, and this is cool, enjoying the moment, but it's time to refresh and think about feeling now.
And Dave, we said this a lot, when Austin Matthews hit the 500 career point mark just a few games ago, that, with regards to him, he's clearly one of, if not the most talented player to ever put on the sweater. And here you've got a guy in Mitch Marner who arguably could be the second, or if you want to put him above that, one of the most talented players to ever put on a blue and white sweater. And to watch both of these guys, do what they're doing right now. And, Matthew sets the record and Marner's not too far behind him. It just kind of gives you a reminder once again of the current era that this Maple Leafs team is in right now. And to have two of the greatest players in the history of this franchise playing on the same team right now is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and they're having fun doing it too. I thought it was kind of funny. I asked Marner also after the game if he caught what Austin Matthews did, which looked like he was pretend throwing the puck to a fan of the milestone 500th point before he actually ended up flicking it over to Bobby, the head equipment guy for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But he said he didn't see it, but he thought it was kind of a funny joke, because when there were all these milestone pucks going on for the stuff that was happening with his point streak earlier on, Michael Bunting kind of did the same, where they were just kind of pretending if it's either Austin or Mitch or someone who's got like this milestone thing, they kind of pretend like they're going to toss it away, like it doesn't matter, but like it's just kind of nice, like a nice gentle rib. But it just speaks to the fun-loving nature of this group, right? So when things are going well and they're clicking like the way they are, it's pretty spectacular. And again, Mitch Marner is just showing unbelievable things on the ice this year. He was also talking about the fact that that assist that led to Tavares' second goal with the soccer kick up, you don't typically see in competition. You see skaters just kind of play around with it and do that in practice. But for him to actually have the awareness and presence to kind of do that and make it execute for an assist was something else. Said he played soccer as a kid and was always looking to use his feet more as a way to kind of engage and be a legal tool in hockey. Of course, you can't do everything with your feet, but it certainly worked out there, and it just speaks to how special he is that he can add 501 by doing something like that. So yeah. It's a great era for the Maple Leafs. The offense is not the question of this team, and where he's already looking at the focus and where it needs to be, that's exactly what the Leafs kind of have to look to right now, because everything is about April, May, and June, if they can get to May and June.
Yeah, that was a pretty incredible play, as you mentioned, with the kick pass over to John Tavares that ultimately led to that goal. But, it's a situation where, before the game, guys play soccer to warm up, so now you know why they have that type of ability.
Super Bowl.
So, yeah, there you go. So as far as John Tavares goes, he got into the top 100 with the first goal that he scored as far as all-time goal scorers. It put him at 408, tying him with Ray Ferraro and Patrick Elias, and then he would score that second one to sit alone, 98th all-time now on the NHL goal-scoring list with 409 goals. It has been a remarkable career for John Tavares. I think we spoke about it earlier this year, about his candidacy, if you will, when it's all said and done, if this is a guy that's going into the Hockey Hall of Fame. I think he is, when it's all said and done. getting a ring, getting a cup, of course, would make that process a lot easier for him. But he's just been so consistent this year. I know there was a bit of a lull recently, with that second line, especially with Calle Järnkrok, Mitch Marner, and John Tavares, maybe not, clicking at the same rates. Marner, especially when he was, going on that crazy point streak. But it's nice to see at least the last few games here that second line and, Marner and Tavares specifically have really started to pick things up with the offense.
Yeah, it's something else. We're all kind of waiting for like that to kind of not work out because they tried it, then he got hurt, he came back, and when we look at potential trade targets, obviously a top six winger is something that's always kind of talked about, but Calle Järnkrok has actually worked out pretty well in that spot from a defensive standpoint for sure. He's kind of been like I don't want to say like it's an upgraded Alex Kerfoot from last year in the most subtle way, but that's kind of what it is. It still may not be the ideal thing. They may still want to find the defensive abilities that Järnkrok and Kerfoot provide on that line, but have a bit more firepower there as well. So they may still look to kind of address it. But Calle Järnkrok, to his credit, since coming back from a groin injury, which he explained, occurred early and probably led to the way he was playing and why he was kind of struggling earlier on, has led to this good resurgence of the second line after it was a bit of a mess, a bit of a different experiment, trying different guys with Marner and Tavares, and both of those guys succeeding in spite of who was on that line. So they've got a setup now. They can really go for it. Of course, they really do have to be careful. I still think they need an upgrade in that spot. But as you're kind of hearing and reading around the league, it's going to be tough finding cap space to upgrade. There's going to be a lot of third-party deals like we saw in 2021 where a lot of teams are going to have to be involved to eat up salary. It's unless injuries occur and the Leafs have all of a sudden all kinds of LTI room outside of Jake Muzzin, it's going to be really tough to upgrade. But so far, Calle Järnkrok has been a solid, consistent contributor on that second line since he's come back from injury.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, saying that it's solid. I don't think it's, the best solution by any means. Just taking a look at some of the numbers here. I think these are prior to tonight's game, so, maybe that's changed after tonight. But, 56% of the expected goals at 5-on-5 with that trio. They're above water as well when it comes to shot attempts, but, they're not generating a ton as far as like actual expected goals per 60, so they're not, the most dynamic elite offensive line. And so, as you said, I mean, maybe that's, definitely an area that the Leafs could improve on. And that's what's really going to be interesting. I mean, I think, there's been a lot of conversations, whether it's Toronto sports radio, whether it's on Hockey Night in Canada, different podcasts about, what the Maple Leafs are going to do at the deadline. And it just seemingly has changed, week to week, month to month, with regards to what the Leafs might do. And I think, the conversation right now is, are they going to swing big, or are they going to look at more, maybe 2, maybe 3 moves and kind of spread it out and try to fill a bunch of holes as opposed to taking that home run swing?
That's what they did 2 years ago. You'll recall they acquired Nick Foligno as their forward solution for the top 6. They acquired David Rittich as a depth goaltender because they weren't quite sure of Frederik Andersen's health. Of course, he was activated for the last game of the regular season and backed up Jack Campbell. And David Rittich got a few games in there toward the end of the regular season. And Ben Hutton was a depth acquisition, as was Stefan Nason, who played just one game for the Toronto Maple Leafs that last game and then didn't really factor at all. And when Nason actually contributed for San Jose against the Leafs earlier this season, I was like, oh yeah, another revenge player. I totally forgot he was a Leaf. He was like the 4th guy acquired in that trio of deals that they made in their 2021 push in that all-Canadian division. So they could go that route, but it's going to be very tough to kind of find a premier guy who's going to be a top 6 that is better than Nick Foligno with the little cap room that they're going to have. It might be one of these things where you need 3 or 4 teams to be involved, and then is it really worth the multiple draft picks that you're giving up in order to kind of make something like this happen? It's going to be very tricky. But again, like I cautioned, You mentioned it always changes week to week. It's because the team situation can change week to week. There could be a major injury. There could be something else that happens with the team or some other deficiency that comes up between now and March 3rd that they realize, oh, well, now this is a problem. Now we've got to address it. So it's really why you're not going to see any big move happen until like the day before or days before the deadline or the deadline itself, because the daily cap calculation and kind of trying to figure things out for what the team is going to look like is just hard to predict between now and March 3rd.
Well, you would have thought, after the game against Seattle, that goaltending maybe is a spot that people would have looked at and said they need to potentially get some depth there. But here is Ilya Samsonov bouncing back with his best game since that shutout against Anaheim back on December the 13th. Gave up 1 goal on 23 shots in this one. He says trusting the process was a big reason for his return to success.
What do you think was different tonight? You mentioned luck wasn't on your side in the past.
It's hard to say. The last 4 games for me, it's really hard. How I said, it's just like a little bit turned for me. But today, I believe my skill, I believe my mental spot. I know if you everyday hard work, it's like it's coming back, yeah. And we'll see today. I believe I'm back on track, yeah. And just stop the puck and get some help for my teammates for a win.
So there's Ilya Samsonov sounding a lot more positive and happy about his performance after the last 4 outings, of course. And if I can make a cross-sport reference here, Dave, I'm going to say that, goaltender in the NHL is a lot like a closer in baseball, where there's going to be blown saves. There's going to be nights where you just get knocked around, but you have to be able to mentally, move on and turn the page. And, I think what's good about Samsonov is that he was saying the right things, that, I just feel good about, where things are mentally. There's just, I have to keep moving on. And, we'll hear from Sheldon Keefe in a moment here, who talked about the work that Samsonov's been putting in. But I think, if we're just going to listen to what Samsonov has to say during this, rough stretch or even just some rough games, it does feel like at the most part mentally he, understands that there's going to be ups and downs and he's just got to stay on the right track. I don't want to beat a dead horse and I don't want to, pick on the guy who's obviously having a bad season, but a lot of the conversation when Jack Campbell was here was every time there was a bad game, it was him blaming himself, whether he was being honest about that, truthful about it or not. I mean, it just doesn't come off great. And I'm sure it doesn't help, you mentally as well, if you're Jack Campbell or any goaltender, where you're constantly just beating yourself up and saying it's your fault that the team didn't win. So, not that Samsonov hasn't been taking accountability, he has, but I think I've also, like hearing that, he's said many times that, he feels good mentally. He knows that he, is very close to turning things around, and definitely was the case tonight.
Yeah. And look, I remember, I think I mentioned it on this podcast that like right after that last start, he just started doing different things to just kind of give himself a bit of a refresh, whether it was going to his first ever Raptors game with SDA and his girlfriend and and Ilya's wife, going there and just kind of changing up the routine a little bit. Goaltenders are creatures of habit. When things are going good and when things are bad, they change it up. That's just what they do to try to get luck on their side, because as he said, quote unquote, at the time, his luck was ass right now. So he really kind of added some of the luck element to it. And, for the most part, he was right. There were a lot of deflected goals, which certainly didn't help. And even in that game that they lost 6-5, there were elements where he was still able to kind of look past it and make big saves to help put the team in the position to at least salvage a point in the standings. And that was the difference between Samsonov's last start before tonight and Matt Murray's last game. So even when there are the difficult ones, he's not just kind of turtling and just giving up on it. He fought through that game, and it carried over into this. And even though that first goal, may have made some people cringe a little bit because it just went straight through him, he fought. And I think that's what teammates need to see on the bench, that if a goalie does give up something like that, that the team doesn't feel like they're in one for the rest of it, that the next save is going to be made or something's going to happen where he makes a save he probably should have made, and that's going to help lift the team. And that certainly did after that first period as well. So that's good on him for doing that.
And I know it's something that you mentioned before, that sometimes it's not so much, the saves that you make, it's when you make them. And
Yeah.
the last couple of games, that was not the case for Samsonov, and it definitely wasn't the case for Matt Murray against Seattle. But tonight, after the Maple Leafs tie that game, I think, Detroit hemmed the Leafs in their own zone like shortly after, and Samsonov had to stand strong there and, made some really big saves when the game was still a 1-goal game for the Maple Leafs, and they had that 2-1 lead. So definitely some huge momentum type of saves to keep his team in front for Samsonov, and definitely a big confidence builder tonight in this one. But let's hear from the head coach Sheldon Keefe, who gave a little peek behind the curtain as far as what Samsonov has been up to try to get his game right.
I think it's noteworthy just that the job Sammy did tonight. We've been needing our whole team to play better, but our junior goalies to play better as well, and hasn't gone as well for them. But Sammy, the last 3 days in particular, he and Curtis Sanford have put in some real work. I mean, our team took yesterday off. Sammy and Curtis did not take yesterday off. Those guys were in working and they're on the ice. And I thought right from the morning right through to the game tonight, Sammy's focus was really, really solid. He looked destined to have a great night here tonight, and I thought he did. He was excellent. We didn't give up a great deal in the second and third periods, but he was ready for anything that was going to come at him. So I was really impressed with the work that he put in to get prepared for this game and the way he came out and gave our group confidence.
So there's Sheldon Keefe telling us about the work that Samsonov has been doing in between some of these games. And, no surprise, Dave, he's a professional athlete. He's going to, put in that work. And sometimes, you can overwork yourself, and maybe you're trying to do too many things to get back into it. But it's pretty clear that, Sheldon Keefe used the F word, not that one, but he said focus, of course. And it's pretty evident that, Samsonov, Curtis Sanford, they had a clear goal in mind of what they wanted to do to get things back going in the right direction. And it was pretty evident in this one.
Yeah, well, I mean, he didn't use the F word that you were thinking of there, but he certainly used it after the first period, because Ilya Samsonov actually mentioned that, quote, Sheldon had some nice words for us after the first period for the way they were playing. So you can pretty much gather that an F word of some kind was being used for that. But no, that is noteworthy. Look, these goaltenders are at a point where, they could have a day off, and if things are going good, then sure, maybe you do take a day off. But I remember one thing I overheard when I saw Samsonov at practice before the game on Thursday. I could hear, how they have those sliding doors. Rob, you've been in the room before, and so you can kind of hear chatter in the distance. You can hear. You can hear Ilya, you can hear Sheldon go to Sammy, smile, Sammy, we love it when you smile. And yeah, he was a little bit tense, like you can sense that he was just kind of like, even when I just chat with him casually, he's like, I need to do something different. That's where the basketball game came in, right? So he did that. And so the other different thing is where maybe if he took a day off, he decided, Curtis, hey, I need to put some work on the ice. I know it's a day off. Can you do it? And he was happy to oblige and do that. So that's significant. Like that wasn't a CBA mandated day off, so they didn't break any rules. That was a decision they made, a half a day out to just kind of give the team a day off. That wasn't a travel day like it was coming back from Denver. So they did that, and Samsonov changed it up. And look, the guy is here to prove himself. Like they've said it, like even Kyle Dubas said it, like this is a 1 year try to prove himself that he belongs at this level. And so when things weren't going great, you start to wonder, is it just going to be a streaky thing, or is he actually going to kind of pull out of it? He needed at least a win above 900. That's what he needed. And he was more than that for them. Not even just because of save percentage was as high as it was, but because he made timely saves when his team needed it. And so maybe he kind of sticks with that groove. But you can even tell in the morning when I was chatting with him, when we weren't sure who the goalie was actually going to be, because there was some confusion, which is why leading up to that sound clip, I actually asked if there was any temptation to go with Samsonov again tomorrow. And he shot that down before offering up that note about Samsonov. So it was interesting. Samsonov was all smiles when I just was informally chatting with him in the room this morning. So I did notice a bit of a change in his tone in that he was a little bit more in an upbeat spirit. And that probably did, like, a healthy mind. When you're thinking positively, you can kind of build that around you. And that's probably why Sheldon offered up that whole destined to win scenario that we saw.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it will not be Ilya Samsonov getting the start against the Flyers, despite how good he looked in this one. It will be Matt Murray getting back in between the pipes for the Maple Leafs on Sunday night. Coming up on Rink-Wide Toronto, we'll get to the Bodog line of the day as the Maple Leafs bounce back with a 4-1 win over the Detroit Red Wings. You're listening to Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. Rink-Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Is your online business ready for the cookie-less future and set to properly capture your customers' valuable first-party data? Hey, it's Ray Ferraro. Right now, my friends at North Beach, along with their partners at Craft Growth, are offering small business owners and entrepreneurs a free website digital audit. So you can find out just exactly how ready your website is for the cookie-less future. Your online presence has never been more important. So visit craftgrowth.net and get your free digital audit. That's craftgrowth.net.
You're listening to Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Maple Leafs winning it 4-1 over the Detroit Red Wings tonight. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter from Scotiabank Arena. It is time for the Bodog line of the day. And Dave, if you had bet on January 7th being the game where the Maple Leafs top power play unit would revert back to the 4 forwards, 1 defenseman, 5-man unit, you won the pool, as the Maple Leafs did do that to start the second period. Morgan Rielly getting back there. It instantly works, of course, with Mitch Marner getting the goal there to tie the game up at 1. But were you surprised that this was the game where they finally decided to get back to that old unit?
No, and for those listening, I was vigorously shaking my head halfway through the question because I remember that first practice, we talked to Sheldon Keefe about the 5-forward power play, and he actually mentioned that in the third period of some previous games when they went with 5F, that if Morgan Rielly was available to them and they were either tied or leading later in the game, that's what they would revert to. And so they reverted to it a bit earlier than they anticipated, only because it was a face-off at center ice with 30 seconds remaining. That's why they did that. And so the situation there is if they lose the puck, they're already in the transition stage where they have to get their even strength team ready to go. And so I think it was Bunting. Was Bunting in the... No, there was...
He was not.
No, of course. No, there was someone on the other side for Detroit who was in there. But I remember I'm getting confused with Bunting, who took a penalty in a different part of the game. But at that point, the transition team has to start coming on with about 25 seconds to go anyway. And that's usually why the second PP has 2 defensemen when they were doing 5F, because they already have a half transition there with 2 defenders out there. So because of that, they had to get 1 there. Because if they lose the puck and it's already back in their end, then it's even strengthened, so they have to even things out. But because it's scored so early, they kind of stuck with it. And at that point, they were leading. And so in a lead, they're not going to do it later in the games. That's already been established. If it's a third period and the Leafs are up, it becomes a risk-reward thing, and they're sure as heck not going to allow the game to be tied or have their lead cut down because they tried to go for the jugular when they're already on top. So you're going to continue to see 5-4s, I'm certain, as soon as tomorrow. But then if they're winning or it's later in the game, that's where you kind of see the Morgan Rielly shift back.
Well, as far as the power play goal goes, Mitch Marner, as we mentioned, scored it. John Tavares had a nice night with those 2 goals and said post-game the power play still trying to find some consistency.
It's really been the unit for quite a while, so obviously things have been getting some good results with Bunce, and he's so good around the net and good hands and recovering pucks and competitive. But obviously Mo's an exceptional defenseman, so just kind of worked out that way and got a big goal. And we're still looking to really kind of find our rhythm and I think really get to a level that we're capable of, and we're still working at it and continuing to find our way there.
There's John Tavares with his thoughts on the PP unit. And it's not that it's a bad power play by any means, Dave. I mean, it's clicking at just under 25%, which currently puts them 10th in the NHL. But you would think with Mitch Marner, William Nylander, Austin Matthews, and John Tavares that it would be much, much higher. I don't want to go into a deep dive of the power play because it feels like a conversation that's been had for like the last 4 or 5 years. Why hasn't it been better at times, and why does it go through so many different lulls? But I think tonight there were some good moments. They get the goal, of course. I thought the first power play they had against Detroit, they had some pretty good opportunities as well early on in the game. So like the power play is just one of those things that it is sometimes hard to explain, why this team can't score more often, but then it will also go through stretches where it just looks unstoppable. And it's like, yeah, this is how it should work. It's like just a weird thing that I think it's hard to kind of put your finger on as to kind of trying to explain it all the time.
You're right that on the surface, being 10th or what they were going into this season is not reason for concern. But I think what has a lot of people frustrated, or even within the team as well, is that they always overperformed in the power play in the first half of the season. Like in 2021, I remember they had a power play that was something really stupid and not sustainable. It was like 45% through like 20 games. Yeah. And then I was just like, okay, I'm looking at the history of power plays. There's no way this is going to stay. It's going to drop off. And so now, it happened again under Spencer Carberry in the 21-22 season, but this time it's slower, and the Leafs don't really have a track record of ramping up the power play. It's always been like a sugar high and fallen down with little blips of energy afterwards. It's like having a 5-hour energy, which I know you used to like a lot. So like you have it, you're all whatever, but then like at some point, like you may need the 5-hour energy, but your season's 8 hours long. So it's one of those like where it eventually goes down. So the Leafs are not used to trending up on the power play. And so that's the real challenge right now. And because they're experimenting, they're really kind of trying to change and see what can work to kind of get it back to where they were, because they want to make sure it's executing at the right time. And the playoffs are a very hard time to execute the power play. And so it's weird that it's been a little bit down, but they've also taken this tack of becoming a more defensive team. And when you're on the power play, you aren't necessarily thinking about defense, but you still have to be aware of your positioning at all times, regardless of the situation. And so that does creep up a little bit, especially as the seconds wane down and you have to start thinking about the transition.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there as far as them, hasn't peaked heading into the playoffs. And maybe that's definitely how you want not even just your power play, but just your whole team to be going heading into the postseason. But John Tavares mentioned there, Morgan Rielly picking up an assist there, 2 points for Rielly, who picked up points for the first time since returning to the lineup in that game.
That's against, important for him.
Arizona. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that game the Leafs lost, of course. But, just a nice momentum boost here for Rielly, who, has taken a bit of a heat, I think, for his play since coming back at points, whether it's defensively or, maybe not looking as great offensively. But I think we all have to remember the guy missed so much time with an injury that he's never dealt with before. So there's clearly still a little bit of hesitancy. How far can I push myself? You don't want to, re-injure yourself. You've suffered injuries before. I have as well, playing sports or what have you, and you come back and, you're trying to be a little bit cautious and not pushing yourself too hard. And I'm sure there's a bit of that for Morgan Rielly. But I thought he looked strong tonight. And just from a confidence standpoint, seeing him get in the rush, do Morgan Rielly type things, I thought there were a lot of positive signs.
And getting on the scoreboard is so important for him. It's a huge identifier of his game. If he's the bona fide number one defenseman on the team, he's got to be producing offensively. And he won't necessarily admit it, but when he comes in, he sees this team performing the way it is. He's in a situation where he doesn't want to do too much too early because he's coming back from injury, but he also knows that offense is such a big part of his game. And with the offense draws the confidence of, of having the swagger of being a number one. That's what comes with it. That's why he's making $7.5 million on average per season. So there is a little bit of that he carries. And if he's not producing points and he's not being in a position where he can add to that, then that's going to affect him a little bit. But this switch now to have TJ Brody back with him is only going to help him. I thought that's been working out pretty good. The optimal look here was Sandin and Liljegren on the third pair, and Giordano Hall kind of splitting the top 4 reps with Riley and Brody is a perfect mix, and that's going to allow Morgan Riley ever so slowly to kind of get his game back. And, even though I still think we're going to see 5 forwards, if Morgan Riley starts to put up more offense and help with the power play, maybe the experiment starts to end. So it's possible. But yeah, a good defensive Morgan Riley is also a good offensive Morgan Riley. The two go hand in hand. For what Morgan Riley critics kind of focus, they don't look at the offensive stuff. But like you can see it in tandem. When he has a good offensive game, his defensive game is just as good. And so it's important for him to be a plus player like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, he's had some good stretches here. He's had some not so good stretches since coming back. But I think on the whole, this team is better with Morgan Riley in the lineup. The next Rink-Wide Toronto postgame show will be Sunday nights when the Maple Leafs and David Alter head off to the city of brotherly love to take on the Philadelphia Flyers on the second half of a back-to-back. As we mentioned, Matt Murray will be getting the start in goal for Maple Leafs.
The Eagles are playing in the same parking lot like just before, so it's going to be a zoo.
Are you going to do an Eagles post-game show as well, or are you going to head over there and check out what's going on there? No, but they're warning. It's weird. Like, Philly's a city where they've got all their sports franchises in the same parking lot. The baseball stadium, the football stadium, and the hockey basketball arena are all in the same quadrant. And so it's just going to be... That's the way it should be, to be honest.
Yeah, if you have enough space, sure. But it's not like downtown Philly. Like there's even talk of, I don't know if you saw, but the ownership of the Sixers are actually trying to get a downtown arena for Philly, like separate from what they have at, oh God, I can't remember. Is it First Union Center or Wachovia? I keep forgetting the name of the Flyers building.
Jeez. I don't think it's Wachovia anymore. I think that was a long, long time ago.
It might be the FU Center for all I know, because that seemed appropriate. Yeah. So it's good, but when the sporting events mash into one, it could be a bit of a disaster. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt your extra like that, but I thought the listeners would want to know that.
No, I think it's good to know. I don't think many people did know that all of the sporting stadiums are in one area. So obviously it's a lot easier to get to, but as you mentioned, it's not downtown Philadelphia. So maybe it is a bit of a struggle to get to some of these games. And tomorrow it's going to be busy for Philadelphia sports fans with the Eagles and the Flyers both in action. But when it's all said and done, we will have yet another Rink-Wide Toronto post-game show here for you. Make sure you like, review, and subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite pods. You can follow us on Twitter at RinkWideTOR, at DAlter, and at RobWong34. And you can always get the pod at RinkWideToronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds, where everyone goes to play. You've been listening to Rink-Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Darren Dreger and Ray Ferraro here from the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. New season is well underway, Ray, and we've got surprising storylines happening across the league.
You bet, Dreg. Surprising starts both the top and the bottom of the standings, and some of those coaching and GM seats have got to be starting to feel pretty warm right now.
We've got it all covered twice a week with some great guests joining us right through the end of the season.
It's the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Check us out wherever you get podcasts or at rayanddregs.com.